The film opens with a young man named Telemachus standing atop a cliff, gazing longingly at the vast ocean before him. His eyes are filled with hope as he waits for the return of his father, Odysseus, who left for war 20 years ago and is yet to come home. At the same time, on the distant shore, an unconscious man lies motionless, his fate uncertain. Whether he is still alive or has already succumbed to the sea's cruel grasp remains unknown. As Telemachus makes his way back home, he encounters a group of men who frequently mock and intimidate him. They see his father's prolonged absence as proof of his death and believe it is time to seize control of Ithaca by marrying Odysseus's wife, Penelope. One of the suitors, Polybus, takes his ambition a step further, brandishing a knife and threatening Telemachus, demanding that he allow him to wed his mother. However, another suitor, Antinous, steps in, intervening on Telemachus's behalf. He orders Polybus to let the young man go before approaching Telemachus himself. Antinous then tries to persuade Telemachus to support his proposal to marry Penelope. He promises to protect her and assures Telemachus that he will treat him fairly if he agrees to the marriage. But Telemachus, having endured enough from Antinous and the rest of the suitors, snaps. With a sharp retort, he orders Antinous to leave at once. Frustrated and exhausted, Telemachus seeks out his mother, Penelope, urging her to choose a husband among the suitors. He believes that only by doing so can they put an end to the constant harassment and threats against their family's rule over Ithaca. Upon hearing this, Penelope shakes her head solemnly. She refuses to live with a man who seeks only power and wealth rather than the well-being of the people. To her, Odysseus remains irreplaceable in her life. However, Telemachus firmly insists that his father has perished in battle. Shocked by his words, Penelope takes a moment to compose herself before finally responding. She tells Telemachus that she will consider the suitors' proposals, but will only choose one after she finishes weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law, Telemachus's grandfather, who seems to be nearing the end of his days. The scene then shifts to the man who had washed ashore. This mysterious figure, whom we will refer to as the stranger, is, in fact, still alive. However, his body is frail and weak, allowing him only to crawl. Fortunately, he is discovered by a kind-hearted man named Eumaeus, who takes him into his home to care for him and restore his strength. The following morning, feeling somewhat better, the stranger speaks with Eumaeus, who informs him that he is now in Ithaca. Curious about his surroundings, the stranger requests to be led outside to observe the land. As they walk, he inquires about the ruling king of Ithaca. With a heavy heart, Eumaeus explains that their kingdom has been without a ruler since King Odysseus left for the Trojan War many years ago, taking Ithaca's finest warriors with him, never to return. Now, the people serve their queen, Penelope, and her son, Telemachus. Eumaeus further reveals that suitors from far and wide have come to claim the queen's hand in marriage, yet she remains steadfast, holding on a hope for her husband's return. Before leaving, Eumaeus offers the stranger food, yet in a shocking turn, the stranger chooses instead to eat dirt. His erratic behavior suggests that he is deeply traumatized, his mind fractured by the horrors of his past. On the other hand, Telemachus tries to persuade his grandfather, Laertes, to return to the palace. As Penelope is left alone there, while the suitors continue pressuring her to marry one of them in order to seize the throne of Ithaca. However, Laertes, who has suffered severe mental distress after losing his only son, ignores Telemachus's pleas. Instead, memories of Odysseus resurface, bringing him to tears. The scene then shifts to one of the suitors, Pisander, who has just arrived in Ithaca. As he explores the town, he notices a young woman and becomes infatuated with her. Determined to find her, Pisander goes to her home, only to encounter her lover, who refuses to reveal her whereabouts. Enraged, Pisander decides to kill the man and vows to track down the woman. That night, as Eumaeus and the others gather, They explain to the stranger the history of Ithaca under the rule of King Odysseus before he left for war. During his reign, Odysseus governed with fairness and wisdom, leading Ithaca into prosperity and security. The people never went hungry, and they were protected by a strong army. However, when Odysseus departed for the Trojan War, taking Ithaca's bravest warriors with him, he never returned, leaving the kingdom vulnerable. Now, Ithaca faces the threat of being overtaken by those seeking to claim Odysseus's throne. Additionally, crime has become rampant, making the island a dangerous place. As lawlessness spreads, the people suffer, struggling to find food and facing the risk of starvation. Despite these hardships, the remaining loyal followers of Odysseus choose to stay in Ithaca, believing that their king will one day return to reclaim his throne and punish those responsible for the kingdom's downfall. The scene then transitions to Penelope, who wanders the palace corridors alone. She appears lonely and deeply misses her husband, as life has not been the same since Odysseus left her. Upon returning to her chamber, Penelope is startled to find Telemachus waiting for her. He demands to know where she had gone in the middle of the night, but Penelope refuses to answer, prompting Telemachus to lose his temper and cruelly call his mother a harlot. Later, before sunrise, Telemachus secretly departs from the palace, sailing to a nearby island in search of information about Odysseus. Soon after, Penelope, realizing that her son has left, seeks out Antinous to ask if he knows Telemachus's whereabouts. At that moment, Antinous insists that he has no knowledge of it, but Penelope does not believe him, knowing that the other suitors see Telemachus as a threat to their plans for seizing Ithaca. Antinous then pressures Penelope to make a decision and marry one of them, but she instead orders him to find Telemachus and ensure his safe return. With no other option, Antinous proceeds to meet with Pisander and the other suitors, but they all claim to have no knowledge of Telemachus's whereabouts. At the same time, Penelope receives news from an elder that her father-in-law, Laertes, has passed away. The elder advises Penelope to remarry, as she needs a husband to protect her, and Telemachus needs a father figure he can rely on. However, Penelope remains steadfast in her belief that her husband, Odysseus, is still alive, and she vows to continue waiting for his return. That night, Eumaeus informs the stranger of Laertes' passing and Telemachus' departure from the palace. Eumaeus appears sorrowful, lamenting how Ithaca, once a prosperous and thriving kingdom, now stands on the brink of ruin. After Penelope lays Laertes to rest, the suitors waste no time in pressuring her to choose one of them as her new husband. Though visibly irritated, Penelope tells them she will make her decision once she has finished her weaving. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Penelope and the others, the stranger secretly observes them from afar. He then asks Eumaeus to take him to the palace, and along the way, he witnesses the suffering of Ithaca's people in the wake of King Odysseus' absence. The citizens endure prolonged famine, their wealth plundered by opportunists. Near the palace entrance, the stranger notices a black dog. Eumaeus explains that the dog once belonged to Odysseus and has remained loyal, waiting for its master's return. The stranger gently strokes the animal, and to everyone's surprise, the dog seems to recognize him and responds affectionately. However, moments later, the dog collapses and dies, too old and too weary from years of waiting. Strangely, the stranger sheds tears at the sight of the fallen creature, his sorrow palpable. As the stranger enters the palace, he sees Polybus and the other suitors indulging in a feast, surrounded by women and reveling in excess. He approaches them, humbly asking for food, but they mock him, calling him a beggar and ridiculing him. When he turns to Antinous for food, the other suitors instead demand that he fight for their amusement. They pit him against a bald, muscular man, expecting him to entertain them with his struggle. Initially, the stranger is overwhelmed by his opponent's relentless attacks, but he soon counters with a powerful strike that unintentionally kills the man. After witnessing this unexpected display of strength, Polybus and the other suitors cease their mockery and allow the stranger to remain in the palace. Later that night, Penelope seeks out the stranger to inquire about Odysseus, as he is claimed to be a soldier who returned from Troy. She asks if he knew Odysseus, and the stranger confirms that he did. Penelope then questions whether he fought alongside Odysseus in Troy. The stranger replies that he did and reveals that Odysseus endured something far worse than death. Though Odysseus triumphed in battle, he lost all his most valued warriors and dearest companions in the process. Frustrated by the lack of a satisfying answer, Penelope furiously expressed her anguish over Odysseus leaving her to go to war. Hearing this, the stranger appeared sorrowful and guilty, yet he remained silent. Penelope then ordered her old maid, Euryclea, to wash the stranger before expelling him from the palace. As Euryclea tended to the stranger's feet, she accidentally discovered a scar, one she recognized instantly. At that moment, she realized the stranger was none other than their long-lost king, Odysseus. Overcome with joy at his return, Euryclea wanted to inform Penelope at once, but Odysseus quickly stopped her. He urged her to keep his identity a secret, as he wished to observe the situation in the palace a little longer under the guise of the stranger. Euryclea agreed and proceeded to recount all that had transpired in the palace during his absence, including Penelope's unwavering loyalty as she awaited his return. The next day, Odysseus visited the tomb of his father, the former king. In that solemn moment, he poured out his sorrow, recounting the hardships he had endured on the battlefield, the loss of all his warriors, and the many trials he had faced. He also expressed his deep regret for leaving his father and family behind, feeling the weight of his guilt. In the days that followed, Telemachus finally returned to Ithaca and rushed to see his mother. He told Penelope that he had received word of Odysseus emerging victorious in the Battle of Troy, but instead of returning home, he had chosen to marry another woman and start a new life with her and their children. He added that Odysseus no longer cared for them. However, Penelope quickly saw through his deception, realizing that Telemachus was not telling her the truth. Soon after, Antinous arrived and declared his love for Penelope, promising to give her everything she desired. He confidently assured her that he would make her fall in love with him. Yet, his intentions were far from noble. He also threatened that if she chose another man over him, he would not hesitate to kill his rival. The scene then shifted to Odysseus, who was confronted by Eumaeus. In that moment, Eumaeus revealed that he had known Odysseus' true identity from the very first time he found him in the forest. Once a formidable warrior tasked with protecting the palace, Eumaeus had been defeated by cunning adversaries who sought to seize the throne. As a result, he had been reduced to servitude under their rule. Eumaeus then described the years of suffering they had endured and pleaded with Odysseus to reclaim his rightful place as king. He urged him to eliminate the suitors who sought to marry the queen solely to gain control over Ithaca. At that very moment, Telemachus arrived, marking the first time Odysseus ever laid eyes on his son. However, Telemachus did not recognize him, as Odysseus had gone to war before he was born. Meanwhile, Antinous, driven by his insatiable ambition for the throne, ordered Pisander and the other suitors to hunt down Telemachus and kill him, as he was the greatest threat to their plans. Elsewhere, Telemachus questioned Odysseus about his identity, but Odysseus simply responded that he was no one. As Telemachus pressed for more answers, Odysseus noticed two of Antinous' men approaching, sent to kill Telemachus. Reacting swiftly, Odysseus ordered Telemachus to hide, but when Telemachus refused to listen, Odysseus had no choice but to knock him unconscious to protect him. Odysseus then killed the two men, and when Telemachus regained consciousness and saw what had happened, he demanded that Odysseus reveal his true identity. At last, Odysseus confessed that he was his father. However, at that moment, Eumaeus arrived with urgent news. Pisander and the others were on their way to kill Telemachus. Hearing this, they fled into the forest. After successfully escaping Antinous and his men, Telemachus confronted his father, accusing him of abandoning both the kingdom and their family. Telemachus refused to acknowledge Odysseus as his father, but Odysseus retorted that Telemachus should have stepped up as a ruler to protect their kingdom after his father left and his grandfather passed away. That night, Antinous discovered that Penelope had been unraveling her weaving each night to delay making a decision about whom to marry. Furious, Antinous pressured Penelope to choose a suitor by the following day, as he refused to wait any longer. The next morning, a maid informed Telemachus that the queen would make her choice that very day. Upon hearing this, Telemachus rushed to see his mother, ignoring Odysseus' warnings that the suitors intended to kill him. Telemachus did not care. His mother was the only family he had left, and he would protect her no matter what. Arriving at the palace, Telemachus boldly approached the suitors who had previously sought to capture and kill him. Soon after, Odysseus entered, and the suitors ordered the servants to throw him out. However, Telemachus defended Odysseus, insisting that he was his guest. Penelope then announced that she would decide her suitor through a contest. They would have to string Odysseus' old bow and shoot an arrow through multiple axe heads, just as Odysseus had once done. The suitors protested, accusing Penelope of using this as another excuse to reject them. However, she countered that if Odysseus could do it, then the suitors should be able to as well. If they refused the challenge, it would prove they were unworthy to replace Odysseus as king of Ithaca. One by one, the suitors attempted to string the bow, but none succeeded. When Antinous took his turn, he furiously threw the bow at Penelope's feet, claiming that this was merely another trick to avoid marriage. He then incited the other suitors, who began insulting Penelope, even calling her a harlot. Enraged by their insults toward his mother, Telemachus stepped forward and volunteered to attempt the challenge, despite the suitors mocking him. At the same time, Odysseus also requested to try and asked Penelope for permission. Realizing at last that the man before her was her husband, Penelope ordered Telemachus to hand the bow to Odysseus. Since the bow was rightfully his, Odysseus effortlessly strung it, despite not having held it for years. Odysseus then took on Penelope's challenge and succeeded in a single attempt. As the suitors ordered him to leave, Odysseus stepped forward and revealed his true identity as their king. Without hesitation, he grabbed an arrow and began attacking the suitors. Panicked, the suitors attempted to flee, but the loyal servants of Odysseus swiftly shut all the doors, trapping them inside. Some begged for mercy, but Odysseus remained unmoved. They had brought suffering upon the people of Ithaca and conspired to kill his son. There would be no forgiveness. One by one, he slaughtered them all, except for Antinous, who remained eerily calm even as he faced certain death. At that moment, Penelope arrived and was shocked to see the massacre before her. Antinous, aware of his sins, stood still as Telemachus, without hesitation, struck him down. Penelope screamed in horror, but Telemachus showed no remorse. When the bloodshed was over, Euryclea turned to Penelope and asked why she seemed so sorrowful when her husband had returned, and her son was safe. Penelope admitted that she never expected things to end in such tragedy. She had hoped for a peaceful resolution. Soon after, Telemachus informed his mother that he wished to embark on a journey to find himself and discover what he truly wanted in life. Though reluctant, Penelope granted him permission to leave on the condition that he promised to return to her one day. After Telemachus departed, Odysseus approached Penelope and expressed his regret for everything that had transpired. He asked her if she still loved him. Penelope simply smiled, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed with emotion. As Penelope helped Odysseus cleanse himself, she told him that there was much she needed to share with him. Odysseus replied that he, too, had stories to tell. In the end, Penelope then said that, above all, they had much to forget in order to move forward. The film ends. Moral lesson from the story: If you wait 20 years for someone, make sure they're not just hiding in disguise watching you struggle. And if a dog recognizes your long-lost dad before you do, maybe you need to pay more attention.